Hello everyone, on today's episode of the 1 Year Life Transformation Challenge, we're going to talk about the difference between responding and reacting and the mindful difference. Hello everyone, on today's episode we're going to talk about responding versus reacting. A lot of things are going to happen to you in life and it's a real frequency roller coaster. There'll be ups and downs, and how you react to situations is your karma. If you buy into negative events, if you become angered, or if you perpetuate anger or hurt and sorrow by reacting and not responding, ultimately you'll live a life of constant flux, constant change, constant heartache, because you'll be continually in basically a spin cycle. When you put your clothes into a washing machine and it hammers those clothes around, that will become your life. Learning how to respond and the difference between reacting and responding can help you slow down that washing machine and see that you're really in control, and you don't need to fight back at everything that happens to you. A lot of these things you can use your own karma or use your own skills and abilities to dodge and weave and not become involved in the drama of the world. So as always, I'm going to begin with a quote on this subject, and that quote is from the main man Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, and that quote is, "Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear?" I'll repeat that. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Lao Tzu instinctively knew a few universal truths from the collective unconscious, and a couple of the points I'd like to make there is, do you have the patience for your mud to clear? Quite often we look around us and see turmoil and drama and problems, and we think that that's external to us, but they're all mind-made. The minute you accept a problem, the minute you buy into a problem and buy into that drama, it becomes your drama. But if you have a chance to let that settle, ultimately the need, the impulse to get involved goes away. I remember it said to me, if you ever wanted to send an email, and this was great advice, to put it in your draft folder and always send it the next day. And what I inevitably found with these situations, although I didn't respond or react to every single email I got, quite often the next day I'd look through my emails and reread them and go, gee, that's a bit harsh. I go, why am I having a go at this bloke? And I'd start to realise that because I hadn't let my mud settle, or the anger settle from what I'd reacted to, I was about to start a brand new war. If I sent that email off at that time, I could imagine it just perpetuating. And I would edit that email, delete some lines, make it much more compassionate and understanding, and all of a sudden the issue would just solve itself. That was fantastic information. The reason I need that information is I was always in self-defense mode. Early in my life I felt like there was me and who I thought I was, and then there was this world, and anytime this world reflected back to me what I didn't believe, I had to defend my position. If someone said to me that I think that all Jews are bad people, I would turn around and I would fight that argument. I would have a counter argument, well, that's not right. And all of a sudden I found myself fueling that person. And I was always in this situation of self-defense on the little me, the I that I'd created, that story, that backpack, that collection of good and bad ideas that you carry with yourself and stories, always defending that backpack, knowing now I know I'm much more than that backpack. I don't need to defend that backpack. This is probably best illustrated in history in one of the most remarkable events of all time. There is no event in history where the global destruction of the earth was a possibility, except one time. So yes, we had the Romans, and we had the Greeks and the Persians, and we had the English Empire. We had a lot of big militaries rocking around the world for a long time, but ultimately the devastation and destruction that they could ever wreak was always localized. Even at the height of its power, the English army could only be involved in maybe 4 or 5, 6 conflicts at one time. Therefore, 300 countries around the world would always be left alone. But this was not true in the 1960s. So during the 1960s, there was a massive build-up of what were known as intercontinental nuclear ballistic missiles. And intercontinental meant that from one continent to another. And these H-bombs, these hydrogen bombs, and these nuclear warheads got to a point where the arms race had meant that we had something, I think it was a 12 times destructive ratio, which means that if we let every single nuclear bomb off in the world, we would destroy the planet 12 times over. So pretty scary place to be. That's why people were building bomb shelters and stressing out and duck and cover at schools underneath their desks, because it was a real threat that the entire globe would be wiped out. This is where reacting versus responding becomes, pretty high level stuff. And there was a situation in which Fidel Castro, an incredibly unpopular leader to the American government at the time, for whatever reasons it didn't matter, but he was unpopular, and that was right or wrong. And he had, just off the coast of Florida, the country of Cuba existed and become a communist state. And at the time, America was paranoid about this ridiculous domino theory that if one country becomes communist, all the ones around it will fall. And it felt that this was a real challenge. Now, ultimately, as they had immediately put sanctions onto Cuba, Cuba looked to Russia as a communist ally to help supply it with wheat, grain, medical supplies during its revolution. Now, ultimately, Fidel Castro and Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of the Politburo, the leader of communist Russia, had agreed to have an arms deal. And secretly, Russia was shipping intercontinental nuclear ballistic missiles to Cuba. Now, what did this mean for the Americans? It meant that they had a Russian ally had nuclear missiles only a few hundred kilometers away from its major city centers, which now ensured that the entire US could be wiped out by nuclear bombs. There was no way they could allow this to happen. However, if they were to push this issue and attack Cuba first, that could lead to a first strike response from Russia, and ultimately the world could be over. Very difficult situation. Lucky, we were very blessed to have an incredibly insightful two brothers who are running America, John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and those two individuals closed ranks, they shut the military out, and they decided on how they'd react to this situation. JFK was told by his military leaders they needed to do a first strike policy, and if he followed that advice, this video wouldn't be happening right now, it would be happening underground in a bunker. So he ignored that advice and really just sat with his brother for night after night discussing what they should do. And an amazing conversation happened in which JFK turned to his brother Bobby, who I think had like 10 children, I think JFK had 3, and said, "We've lived good lives, Bobby, we've had it well. But our children, they haven't even had a chance to live." And he goes, "I'm not scared to die." JFK was a war hero. "But I think my children deserve a chance to live, and I think yours do too." So he then went ahead and set up a nationally televised conference, which he knew the Russians would be watching, and he responded, not reacted, to what was happening. Now, he was going to launch what was known as a blockade. Now, just before he was about to go on air, and no one knew what was going to happen, his brother turned to him and said, "Actually, we can't use the word blockade because it's too aggressive, and actually in the declaration of war, international war treaties, a blockade is an act of war. So if we blockade Cuba, then we're going to, it could be an act of war, and this could start a nuclear war. Even though it's a very passive way of dealing with the situation, it could still start a war." And JFK sort of looked at him and said, "Bobby, I've got this." JFK went on air, live TV, not this polished junk that we see now with with screenshots and imagery and beautiful scenes in the background of the politicians. Live on air, JFK announced that he would be launching a quarantine of Cuba. Now, quarantine is not an act of war. A blockade is. Ultimately, the quarantine stopped the missiles coming to Cuba. Russia came to the negotiating table, removed their nukes from Cuba. America removed their nukes from Turkey, and JFK saved the world. Now, if he reacted angrily, as many American presidents, you can imagine how George Bush would have reacted to the Russians putting nukes on his doorstep, the world would be gone. And that is a key insight into the power of simply responding versus reacting, and it's one of the reasons we're only here. So how do we do this? How do we come from a framework in which we are constantly responding, not reacting? Well, the first thing that will help you is not to come into any conversation with a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset, which is, I know the answers, therefore I'm going to this conversation not to listen, but to wait for my chance to react and give the answers, will create big problems. For a few reasons. One, you have no chance to learn when you have a fixed mindset. When you go into a conversation ready to argue that the world is flat, you pretty much will ignore any information that says the world is round, no matter how logical it is. I don't know if you've ever got into a fight in a relationship and all this logic is sounding great to you and the other person is just not hearing it. There's a brain reason for that. When you get angry, your amygdala, your fight and flight center, takes over, and blood is drawn from your prefrontal cortex, your logic center, the ones that make good decisions, back to your fight or flight system, and you come from that place. Your hearing actually is reduced, and your hearing's not reduced, but your ability to take in new words is reduced, so really you learn nothing. The second way to respond, not react, is to be present. When you're thinking about how this could hurt you in the future, or worried about what people did to you in the past, you're constantly cycling through old thoughts and just spitting them out. But when you're present and aware and come from the moment without dragging that backpack full of stories into the conversation, you're ready to listen and to respond accordingly to the information in front of you. Not to the fact that this person is making you angry because they're acting just like an ex-boyfriend from 4 years ago, but from the real moment. Number 3, focus on your outcome. Do you want to be angry or do you want a solution? And I ask people this all the time because quite often people just want to be angry. If they just want to be angry, that's okay. Go out, scream, grab a pillow, do what you have to do. But most of us ultimately want a solution. They want to find better communication, better love. They want to find out how they can, pay off this loan quicker or how they can return this product. And if your outcome is to, for example, improve your relationship after a problem, then you need to drop the antics, you need to drop the drama because it's not going to serve your outcome. Staying focused on what your outcome is stops you deviating and bringing up old things. We all know we've been in conversations, perhaps in relationships where we're dealing with one thing which is almost solvable, but then we throw in things from the past and things that could happen in the future. And you can never solve things in the future and the past because they don't exist. And finally, karma. Understanding karma. Karma is a very easy way to see karma is the way one person behaves is their karma. For example, if they're acting like a pork chop or an idiot, that's their karma. How you respond to that situation is your karma. If you then get involved and decide you want to teach them a lesson or get your own way or really put them down, that becomes your karma. You don't have to buy into other people's karma. You can very simply allow it to cruise past, just like the wind, and allow it to become part of the collective unconscious. Shouting at the sky because it's raining is not effective, and really that's what we do in all these situations. Ask yourself and think at the end of this video, some situations in the last few years that have really spiraled out of control, did you respond or did you react to that situation? And I would suggest that in a lot of those situations that spiraled and continually out of control were because you reacted, not responded. Pain is real and it's in the moment, but suffering is when you react and continually cycle that pain back into your life. Pain leaves very, very quickly from your life, but suffering sticks around. So to end suffering, understand the difference between responding and reacting. We wouldn't be here today if JFK didn't work out the difference and wouldn't have this conversation, and I hope you can bring this into your life. I can't wait to see you tomorrow, but until then, goodbye.